Alrighty, so growing up with Asperger's, I understand that it's not pronounced Asperger's. It's Aspergers. It's an Austrian word named after, of course, the researcher that came to build the theory around it. Um, in any case, all that stuff's covered on Wikipedia. You don't need me to describe that, but I'm going to say Asperger's because habit, and that's how it's commonly pronounced, at least in North America. So in any case, firstly, I'm not formally diagnosed. I'm self-diagnosed, and and that of course complicates the whole getting diagnosed because now I'm an adult and I've got 29 years of practice dealing with people in an adult and proper way. So it doesn't always come out as being an issue, but I assure you internally it's quite the issue. Welcome to invisible disabilities and how they make it look like you're building an excuse for yourself. Um, so yeah, in any case, Asperger's. Growing up with Asperger's. I'm not used to talking to a camera, so I think next time I do a video like this, I'm going to, actually get someone to talk to. I'll talk to my mask over here. But, uh, but yeah, so in any case, um, I don't know. The earliest memories I can think of in it being an issue was that I kind of didn't always have the same interests as my friends, and my interests always tend to be rather obsessive and um, I almost want to say indulgent, but I basically dig myself into a new interest, a new hobby, a new fad, and it would just be deep, 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 deep obsessive every time. Um, yeah, I mean, I got into a hobby called Warhammer where you deal with like little miniature models and you basically, it's a game. You have battles with your friends using dice and rulers, etc. And really quite intricate, which has always been something that fascinated me. I don't like things to be complicated. I like them to be intricate, um, and preferably to have some depth to hold my attention for longer than 10 minutes. Same thing goes with conversation. I could never just have a small talk conversation. It would always have to be something deep and profound or something with direction, um, which of course makes it sometimes difficult just to get along with people in general because not everyone wants to speak to a lecturer all the time. Um, that being said, maybe I should get more in practice with talking to a camera because cameras don't get bored. You, the poor audience, probably will. So in any case, yeah, many hobbies, Pokemon being a big one. Um, couldn't just play the game, couldn't just enjoy the show. In fact, I didn't really enjoy the show because, let's face it, that's some terrible animation and horrendous storytelling. But the games, it got to the point where I couldn't just play the game. I would have to keep track of the stats of all my characters that I'd use, and and as they get stronger and level up, I'd literally keep journals of the numerical stats, and I did that so much to the point where I memorized the first 151 Pokemon by their stats and by their statistics and their abilities, etc., etc., etc. And and I remember going to tournaments and competitive scenes, the competitive circuit, and I would be able to guesstimate the stats of my opponents on the fly and decide if I had an advantage or not, whether or not, who would move first based on their speed stat, these sorts of things. And it was a big game of probability meets um, uh, strategic calculations meets basically gaming it because you know how the game works instead of dealing with what the designers wanted you to see it for. Um, in any case, another tangent ramble. And yeah, so growing up through my youth, even just going to got a truck coming by, even just going to school, I never had an interest in the conventional lessons, and because of that, the teachers figured that I was just perpetually disinterested in the subject. Um, which is funny that I ramble on about keeping stats of the Pokemon there, but math was always my weakest thing because to me numbers are highly conceptual. They don't carry with them an inherent meaning. I find people with Asperger's and many cases of autism spectrum disorder, there's quite often two or three categories of people. There's the numerological people. I call them the math magicians. There's the linguists, which is my style, and then there's the people that are more visual or more creative, more artistic. Um, but then you get the math magicians, and they're creative and artistic with the numbers. You've got the linguists like myself, where I look at etymology and I understand the history and working of words. So I quite often create my own words based on my understanding of etymology, and it drives people nuts. They no one wants to have to try and figure out what you're saying because you're using these alien words that you created on the spot through just sheer understanding of a language. So that's kind of fun. Let's see what else is there. Yeah, so in school, it's never focused on work, and it was. I remember sitting in class. It was a geography class, which is funny because now I'm fascinated by culture, but a geography class was really one of those classes I just wasn't interested in, and because of that, I literally couldn't do the work. I could focus there. I could force myself to read a text, and no, that wasn't happening. Um, I would just go off my own little world in my head and ponder things, ponder how that cabinet over there is made, or what have you. Homework, right? Yeah, and uh, and yeah, so I ended up having special tutors. Um, Apparently, I wouldn't have known this, but I had child psychologists come in from Toronto to try and test me and see what's going on. And in the end, they just concluded um, that I was stubborn or abnormal, or of course, one or two of them presented the idea that I had ADD or ADHD or just whatever. But it wasn't that I couldn't focus at all, because as soon as I was dealing with the subject I was into, whatever fad or hobby, or I was drawing, or something that excited me, it was obsessive. Changing the subject away from that subject was nigh impossible. I've since gotten better. Um, so yeah, that was a thing. Um, One of the common traits with Asperger's syndrome is that the child in question has a tendency of latching on to like a specific friend. It's like a best friend. It might not be a mutual relationship, but there's like a sort of clinginess, and I had always sort of had like one best friend on hand. According to Temple Grandin, one of the leading researchers on autism spectrum disorder and Asperger's, um, pointed out that it's quite common for that sort of latching on mentorship to happen, and therefore someone with Asperger's syndrome, one of the best things they can have is a mentor. Well, I don't have a mentor per se, but I have someone that I look up to quite deeply, and they're someone that it's like he's a martial arts teacher that's really shaped my life. I'm not a student, but I study the shit out of him, and yeah, so that's the thing. What else was there? Oh yeah, so they stuck me in special education class, special ed or whatever, for quote unquote privileged children. I remember reading the letter myself saying that I have special needs, and I thought that was flattering and didn't know what that implied at the time. It meant that I needed special attention. Uh, so you end up having someone that's desperately bored in school. You take them out of the main course. Probably the best thing that could have happened was that they would have pushed me ahead a couple grades. But then there still would have been that interest thing. I needed the challenge and I needed the interest, and I had neither. And they threw me in special education class where there was children that did need special attention. And these children, I mean, they're everything from people that had severe mental handicaps to people that were just troubled youth and abused at home and these sorts of things. In which case, again, an environment change would have been better than sticking them in a special class with teachers that are specialized with dealing with disabilities. Um, Mine wasn't a disability, but I definitely needed a different sort of environment, a different sort of learning, and something that catered more to my interests. Um, that's a big lesson that I would have for any parents and teachers out there that are dealing with a youth with Asperger syndrome disorder in particular is that they're going to have a passion, an interest, something that excites them, something that holds their attention for hours, days, weeks, months, and hopefully years. Instead of, well, there's two ways to go about this, and unfortunately, I only live once, so who knows. But instead of forcing them to expand their horizons in a sense that, like, okay, if you do all your homework, then you can play with your maths. Um, I think it's ideal to use their focus and their interest as the nucleus of their living, and from that expand everything. For me, my niche hyper focus with my Asperger syndrome was martial arts. It took me 16 years of martial arts to be able to find a sort of depth in the martial arts that was exactly what I was looking for, and kept going deeper and deeper and deeper and expanded and became a much bigger thing. So in any case, in my particular situation, I've seen this in a few others. You take a youth that has their hyper focus, their niche thing that they do and they obsess over, and you should expand it. You should completely just let it stretch out. For me, martial arts. I mean, what I did wasn't exactly just karate, but um, and I did karate for 12 years, so I get to say that. But it started off with karate, and it started off with some of my friends were in martial arts, and so I created a sort of social environment there that was good for me. But then also drowned out in egotism and arrogance. My peers would have that, and I wouldn't get it at all. I still don't understand when you have youth that bully each other to show their affections and their friendliness. That doesn't particularly make much sense to me. So um, so I had karate. Now in the classical teachings, the stuff you see in movies and whatnot, let's say in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, all the martial artists were experienced medicine practitioners in certain ways. You know, it, and you have the cliche of martial arts and medicine being the same, but no one really did that much. You see it sometimes in China where you have like Tai Chi and Taoism closely entwined, and therefore it leaks into classical or traditional Chinese medicine. That's kind of what I'm talking about, but with martial arts, for example, my best example because my obsession, with martial arts, for example, you are dealing with culture of the body, the internal workings of yourself, your psyche, your psychology, your how you treat others, the sociology, how you exercise your body, which by its nature is a form of medicine, and then it expands from there. The type of traditions I deal with, it's a series of systems where how you move the body is the core nucleus of the understanding. It's biomechanics. And you expand from there, and it ends up being involving medicine, be it herbalism or bone and muscle alignment. Massage is a very popular combination. And in these same traditions, you also have things like battlefield tactics, which are really just an expansion off of sociology. Um, you end up looking at things sort of like a chess game. So in any case, because of my passion with the martial arts, I expanded that into learning a second language, Japanese, um, and French for that matter, so second and third language because of my passions. Um, I started studying massage therapy. I started looking at nutrition and dieting. I started looking at, how I live my life and how I how I govern my physical body and my own mind. Like, I mean, in my environment, I'm sitting on the floor. Um, the only chair I own is back there, and I use it to practice rope arresting techniques because, wouldn't you know, practicing that stuff on a human body is quite often boring for that human. If I need to drill hours on these same ties, I should have something that's not going to complain. So there's that logic. So in any case, that's a tangent there, but in short, if your son or daughter is obsessed with some niche focus of math, let them focus on it, but also assist them in using that as a launching pad to expand what math means to them. That has been the most effective route I've seen with people with Asperger's. You take their obsession and you expand it. You don't isolate it. You don't turn it into a reward if they eat all their vegetables. You don't do that sort of thing. That's a sort of conceptual, conventional thinking that doesn't make sense to people with Asperger's. I sometimes describe Asperger's as being like um, seeing the forest for the trees. You look at a forest, but you can only see the details of the trees. We're very detail-minded individuals. So, you know, for you to be like, if you don't eat your veggies, you don't get dessert. That doesn't necessarily make sense to someone with Asperger's. I mean, it doesn't make sense to most children initially, anyways. You try and tell them the vegetables are good for them, and what does that mean? But the concept of reward tends to be different. And the question ends up being, like in the Aspie mind, the question ends up being, yeah, I see what you're trying to do there, but wouldn't it be better if I did it my way? Because it makes sense to me my way. You know, yes, I should have dessert after I have my vegetables. However, it makes more sense to have my dessert first. So in any case, you have to explain it and wire it around a little bit differently. Uh, oh boy, what else is there? Yeah, so that's that's me rambling about Asperger's more than growing up with it. But quite often you get questions like, when did you first know you were different? You always feel different. You you see other people and you see how they behave, but it's not the same. You feel detached from them. You feel different. I've always felt like I was playing outside of the game. There's the social game where you say what's nice, you say what's appropriate, you please your boss, you do these sorts of things. But I always felt like I was standing outside of that sphere that is the conventional workplace or the school environment. You know, um, we'd have a teacher with, like, let's say, a lesson plan. They'll have the month-long lesson plan, the module, and they're sitting there teaching from that, and they're going to present with you information based in that order. But what happens when you already have seen the lesson plan and you understand the order and logic that they're dealing with, but it's not because you already know the bigger picture, you don't have to, you don't feel inclined to stick to the lesson plan. You're like, but I want to learn this now, or I've already heard this part, or I've already heard the next module and I see how you're leading up to it, so you sort of fast track in your head. I'm not saying that's correct, but that's it. That's sort of the feeling of having Asperger's, is you're already seeing a larger picture, especially after years of not socially fitting in properly. So you get used to seeing the situation differently. So many people with Asperger's have a tendency of always knowing they're different, never quite fitting in, and but never knowing why or how. I mean, with any luck, you get diagnosed and you've got your answer. But I was 26 when I even heard the word Asperger syndrome disorder, um, or Asperger's. In which case, it's like, do you eat that? I don't know, man. Or I thought I was mishearing it. It was like, I has burgers, as like a sort of slang. But yeah, Asperger's. Yeah. It was only 4 years ago. Oh God, like 4 years ago now that I even heard of it. And it was actually my mother that mentioned it to me. And because she had a new friend who had two kids, or sorry, one kid with Asperger's syndrome disorder, another kid with a different handicap of some sort, and um, and so she was learning about it an awful lot, and she's just realizing um, over and over how much I had in common with this thing. And she was a single mother. No one knows better than a single mother. Um, and I matched a lot of the things that she was seeing in this other child. And so she mentioned that to me, and to get it straight, my mother's not the type of person that would give anyone an excuse to half-ass their life. She would never give someone a crutch, so to speak. So for her to be suggesting to me that I should get that looked at, I took it seriously. And I mean, she lives 4 hours north, so on the drive home from there from a visit, I was on my phone reading it up on Wikipedia, and I was reading it out to my ex-wife at the time, or well, she was my wife at the time, but my ex-wife now. Um, and we were just like shaking our heads. It was spot on, spot on, spot on, spot on. Everything matched like to a T, save for a couple things which I compensated for over my life. And it was it was freaky to know that I had like a neurological difference to other people. Like, what do you do with that? I mean, I understand neuroplasticity, but there's a certain point where you spend so much time working on correcting yourself, you start to wonder, is it better to just work on my strengths or compensate for my weaknesses the whole time? And I just spent, at that point, I spent 26 years compensating for my weaknesses, trying to be normal, trying to fit in, without having any conceptual idea of what normal or fitting in meant. And yeah, so I looked into it, spot on, makes tons of sense. I looked into some of the authors on the subject, particularly Temple Grandin is someone that was really influential on my understanding of Asperger's, and um, and yeah, she um, her publications sort of gave me a working model with which to sort of look at myself and understand things, and that was pretty cool. So that's mm, that's the fast track version of Luke from childhood to adult. And as we can see, I can ramble on forever. I just did a 22-minute video, my screen says here. Like, verbal diarrhea. I haven't decided if I'm going to chop this down or not, but I definitely know it's going to be like a gigabyte and a half file at this point. So in any case, I'm going to end that there. I'll probably ramble on and on and on more some other time because this was kind of fun. I've talked about Asperger's syndrome a lot throughout the past 4 years or so in my life, and I've always told myself I should just record this because it should probably help someone or give someone an idea of what's going on um, with Asperger's or with their children. I know that I'm really fortunate to be as self-aware about my qualities as I am, and I happen to be really academic in nature too, so I can ramble on like that. So yeah, that's it. There you go. End rant. I'll probably do another one soon, shortly even. I don't know. I'm on a rant. I'm on a roll. All right. Party.